Late summer evening in Montana Territory. Storm anvil bruising the sky. Heat lightning crawling over Slate Buttes. A bone-white wash ribboning through sage and chokecherry. A wagon lies split like a cracked rib. Vultures tack the thermals. In the arroyo, a cinnamon grizzly rears. Wet muzzle pine pitch bristles between life and hunger. Temperance Vale, a young settler widow left behind for water by her husband's kin, stumbles upon a Cherokee boy pinned on scree, his leg trapped under the wagon's broken tongue, with one canteen, a half-spent pistol, and no allies for 30 miles. She steps between the grizzly and the boy, choosing a stranger's life over her own. She lights the last match and lifts the burning canvas like a shield, just as a rider silhouettes the ridge at dusk, lowering his rifle not at the bear, but at the boy. This tale survives in a sheriff's deposition, with one name scratched out, and in an army surgeon's sealed hospital file, stamped with a bear print of ink. Next, you will see why those two marks, an erasure and a print, decide who lives and who's blamed. Wind took the fire sideways, and the canvas sloughed from her hands. The grizzly shifted its weight and made up its mind. Temperance heard the dry click of a safety and the rider's horse blowing foam. She raised the pistol, the last bullet waiting like a prayer you do not want to spend. She did not aim at the bear. She sighted up the ridge and found the shine of the rifle's front bead, the one small bright thing a man trusts more than his heart, and she fired. The bead blew to sparks. Metal rang. The rider cursed and jerked his head, and the bear took the noise for challenge and surged forward with a sound that unstitched every nerve in her body. She drove the burning canvas full into its face. Fire licked whiskers. Smoke filled her mouth. She heard the boy behind her drag a breath between his teeth. The bear swiped without full will, more offended than murderous, and the canvas spun away, glowing, and fell into the wash. The grizzly backed into shadow and paced there, torn between hunger and this new puzzle that smelled like pitch and woman. Heat lightning walked another ridge. The rider spurred down with a rage that rang the rocks. When he hit the arroyo and lifted his hat, she saw his face. Ezra Calder, her husband's cousin by marriage, a man born to a soft bunk and a hard jaw. "You'll get away from that boy," he said, voice carrying into the storm hush. "He's a raider. You can smell it on him." "What I smell is pitch," Temperance said, "and a man who sold 2 canteens and called it scouting." His mouth pulled. "You mind yourself. You left me for dead," she said. There was no heat in it, just a true thing set on the ground between them. The grizzly moved again, making the arroyo feel too small, turning the air into something that could snap. Ezra's horse shied and came back under his knee. He tried to raise the rifle to his shoulder and found only a front tube with no bead. He cursed again and dropped it to his thigh. "Stand aside," he said. "There's money on the heads of boys like that." "I've seen more hunger in your eyes than in his," she said, "and I'm looking at a bear." Ezra slid the rifle into its scabbard and drew a revolver. The boy's breath grew thin. Temperance stepped wider, sand flowing around her boots. She did not lift the pistol again, because the cylinder held only emptiness, and the truth of it would show in her hands. The bear's breath came in a wet engine sound. Ezra tilted his head to get a clean line past her. The bear made up its mind and charged. What happened next came in pieces. The world shook under a run of weight. Ezra shot wild, the horse bobbing and blocking his second aim. The boy cried out once. Temperance grabbed the wagon's tongue with both hands and heaved. The wood moved a hand's width. The bear blew past the rim of her vision and cut toward gunflash out of instinct. Ezra's horse half-reared. The revolver cracked again, white-hot in the dark. The shot hit the grizzly high in the shoulder, not enough to kill it, enough to make pain and fury. The bear struck the horse with the side of its head, and horse and man went down in a scrabble of hooves and cursing and dust. The revolver fell and vanished in sage. The grizzly bellowed and reared and smacked at the place the light had been, and the horse screamed the way animals do when their weight goes wrong. Temperance used the space. She set her shoulder to the wagon's tongue and pushed until her teeth groaned. Wood shifted another inch. The boy twisted and freed his leg with a sound that made vomit rise in her throat. "Can you stand?" she said. He nodded and did not cry again. She got him up on his good foot and slung his arm over her shoulder. The grizzly wheeled at the movement. Ezra scrabbled in the dust for his gun and found only weeds. The bear dropped to all fours and came on, slower now, hurt and mad, choosing the nearest. Temperance turned her body to make herself wide and loud and false big, yelling from the bottom of her lungs. The sound cracked. The bear hesitated for one heartbeat. Ezra crawled toward the wash. The boy made a sound like a swallowed sob and held on. The storm came then, not rain, but wind and grit, and swept the scent of smoke and blood into a new shape. The grizzly lifted its head and tasted the air and decided there were easier meals. It swung off toward the ridge, shouldering into chokecherry, and went up the slope, dragging one foreleg. Ezra got to his feet, shaking, and spattered with the horse's foam. He found his hat, slapped it clean, set it on, and looked at Temperance like she were a problem that would have to be solved later. "You'll answer for this," he said, voice threadbare, "for harboring, for theft." "What did I steal?" she asked. "My time, my horse, and what the town deserves," he said, and he looked pointedly at the boy. "There's a bounty posted. Then take your paper and show it to a priest," she said. "Maybe he'll read you the part about killing children." The boy's weight pulled hard on her shoulder. His breath hitched irregular. Ezra stared at them until the wind pressed tears out of his eyes, then spat, turned, and limped up the wash to where the horse had gone, calling for it, a raw sound, swallowed by the oncoming dark. When night fell, it fell like a thrown coat. The heat went with it, and a cold that smelled of metal moved in. Temperance settled the boy against a lee of stone and made a small fire the size of a hand with what dry grass she could find and the shredded rope from the wagon. She tore a strip from her petticoat and bound his shin where it had bruised ugly under the skin. When she pressed above the ankle, he sucked a breath and set his jaw. "What's your name?" she said. He looked at the fire and then at her. "Yona," he said. She did not know the word, then meant bear in his own tongue. She only nodded. "I'm Temperance," she said. "You stay awake if you can." "Water?" he asked. She tilted the canteen and let him wet his mouth and nothing more. "The first drink is the one the body tries to make into a flood." He nodded again in thanks and did not ask twice. Around them, the night pawed the edges of the firelight. After a while, they both heard it, a soft pressing of sand that came and went in circles. Temperance reached for the pistol, because empty is better than nothing in a hand, and she kept her face smooth. Far off a bell tolled, one time, then nothing. No church stood anywhere near the wash. The sound had a way of coming in and out on the wind that made a person doubt themselves. She pressed the boy's shoulder. "You hear that?" she said. He nodded. "Sometimes the bell rings," he said, "when the old ones want the living to look up." She did not know if that was fear or lore, and right then, it was the same thing. She fed the small fire until it could keep a circle. Every so often she saw a darker dark move at the limit of sight, and then stop as if considering them, then pace away. Once, a huff rolled in close, full of heat and rot. She burned sage she found under the wall of the wash where the roots held, and the smoke made her eyes sting and gave a bitter taste to their breath. Yona slept a little and jerked and woke and apologized in a whisper, as if he had broken a rule. She told him to sleep again. She let herself drift in steps only long enough to feel the ground, and then rise back. The bell did not sound again. Toward dawn, the sky bruised in the other direction. Cold gave to gray. A man came down the slope with his horse on a lead, and a blanket rolled behind the saddle. He moved like someone who thought about where his weight went. He stopped a long way off and raised his hand, palm out. Yona opened his eyes and said, one word very softly, "Uncle." Gray elk came into the wash and knelt in the sand where the wind had made rings. He looked at the boy's leg, and then at Temperance's hands, and then up at the ridgeline. He did not speak for a time. The air held with him. Then he said, "You stood where men do not stand." "Someone had to stand somewhere," she said. He nodded once. "Debt will be paid," he said. He pulled a small bone tube from his pouch and breathed a note into it that ran along the ground. Yona's eyes went wet in a way that had nothing to do with pain. Gray Elk touched the boy's forehead, then set his palm on the sand as if it were a table and pressed it flat. When he looked at Temperance again, there was both thanks and weight in him. "There is a law for us," he said, "older than your papers. We keep it." She did not argue law with a man who carried himself like that. She asked the thing that had to be asked. "Can you get him to a doctor?" "I can get him to our women, who will do better," he said. "And if your doctor will come to where he lies, we will listen." He cut 2 lengths from his blanket and bound the splint more firm. He gave Temperance a strip of jerky and did not watch her to see if she would share. He seemed to know she would. He listened to the wind until his head turned, and then they all heard what he heard. Many hooves, not a stampede, a posse. They came into view with dust lifting around their horses' legs and the first sun painting their hats. Sheriff Abel Kincaid rode front with a badge pinned to a vest that had seen too many cleanings and not enough washing. Ezra Calder rode to his right. 4 others spread behind, men Temperance knew as neighbors when the word still meant something. Their rifles were unshouldered. They fanned and stopped where they could put Temperance and the boy, between them and the stone. Kincaid took in the scene slow. He had the kind of face that looked honest, because it was tired. "Mornin'," he said, not as a courtesy, just as a marker in time. "You all right, Mrs. Vale?" "I am," she said. "He is not." She lifted her chin at Yona. Ezra spoke quick. "That boy is Raidstock," he said. "They cut my fence last week. Lost 2 head. This is the one what hides in the draws and signals his uncles." Gray Elk did not look at Ezra. He looked at Kincaid. "The fence was cut by wind and age," he said. "Your wire sings when a bear leans it. It sang all night." Kincaid shifted his jaw. "You're Gray Elk," he said. "I know that name." He nodded toward the leg. "That break ain't from a fence. It is from your cousin's wagon," Temperance said. "From a man who sold the water and called it looking, and from a bear that ought to have eaten all of us and did not." Ezra's face went a color, like old meat. "You want to be careful with your mouth," he said. "Sheriff, I'm putting a charge here. Harboring, theft, possibly worse. You know the bounty posted." Kincaid looked at Temperance, then at the boy, then at Gray Elk, then out over the wash as if the land itself might give him a way through. "I heard a complaint about a cow," he said. Dr. Lydia Albright came then, sauntering in late with her hat pulled low and a satchel bouncing off her hip. She wore army blue in a cut that fit a person who did work, not a man's hand-me-down. "You heard wrong, Sheriff," she said, pleasant as a cousin, at a church dinner. "I looked at that cow. Bite pattern says ursine, teeth wide apart, big mouth, short temper. Forensic enough?" Ezra spat into the sand. "You army folks always got a name for the thing that did the taking, and it's never the ones it really is," he said. Albright smiled, a thin, private smile that did not reach her eyes. "I keep notes," she said. Kincaid put a hand up, like he could slow the rain. "Notes or no, we've got a boy here, and men behind me want law satisfied. There's talk, there's a bounty, there's fear. There's also treaty custom," Gray Elk said calmly. "He is clan. He goes to clan. You want to ask questions. You come when the fever is gone, and you come alone." The posse shifted as men do when they are given a word from a mouth they do not believe should be allowed to speak. Ezra laughed once. "He goes to jail until the territory says otherwise," he said, "or the money lands." Kincaid's shoulders sank a fraction, as if the badge weighed an ounce more with each breath. He looked at Temperance. "I can take him into protective custody," he said, "which is the only way I can keep Ezra's friends from doing worse than the law allows." Gray Elk did not move. "What you call protection is a door that shuts," he said softly. Albright set down her satchel and pulled free a folded paper, the edges worn, a stamp clear in the corner like a child's hand had been pressed there in ink. She did not show it to the posse. She showed it to Kincaid. His eyes flicked, then flicked to Ezra, then to Temperance, then back to the stamp. A bear's paw print, not real, but a mark someone had chosen on purpose. There's a sealed file at Fort Ellis, she said mildly, tied to an incident last month involving a wagon, a horse, and a man with the last name Calder. Strictly between medicine and God for now. But if we're throwing boys in cells, maybe we talk about who sold water that wasn't his. Ezra's hand strayed toward his belt, and then fell away. You got a lot of talk for a woman, he said. Good thing talk is free, she said. Cheaper than bullets. Kincaid turned his horse, so it walked a slow circle, and looked at all their faces as if trying them in a line. When he stopped, he had made up his mind. I'm taking the boy in, he said. It's the only way I keep this from turning bad in the sun. He'll be brought to the mission for a night. Father Dunn will sit with him. Tomorrow I'll decide what comes next. Gray Elk's mouth tightened. There will be a count, he said. If he is a hair less than he is now when he comes back, there will be a count for that too. He's not coming back, Ezra said, smiling small. That's the part you're not hearing. Temperance stood. Sheriff, she said, if you take him, at least let me ride with him to the mission. He trusts the sound of my voice now. Don't make him be afraid in a place with strange walls. Kincaid met her eyes. There was something like apology in his. All right, he said. You ride. Gray Elk, you ride too. But you keep your men off our tails. Ezra, you keep your mouth shut unless I ask. They moved in a tangle that had to become a line. The boy was lifted as gently as hands could do it and set across a spare mount. Temperance walked beside with her hand on the saddle's rear ring, so he would feel her there. Gray Elk rode on the other side, quiet as a man, walking his own shadow. Albright fell in back, the satchel tapping her leg. Ezra rode ahead to make his friends feel like he still led something. Kincaid hovered over them all like a slow hawk, wishing there were more mice than snakes. They had gone a mile when the storm that had been holding its breath all day took the lanterns of the town in its own. Wind came low and sudden and plucked flames out one by one, as if with fingers. By the time they reached the mission yard, the lantern over the gate was nothing but smoke. Father Lionel Dunn pulled the chapel door open on darkness and crossed himself like a man trying to draw a window on black water. Bring him in, he said. The Lord has a corner here we can put him in. He has a name, Gray Elk said. You use it. Yonah, Father Dunn said, obedient and soft. They laid the boy in a back room where the pews had been pushed out and a cot set under a window patched with horn. The air smelled like old candles and cold stone. The storm pressed its hand over the roof and made the rafters speak. Kincaid nodded to Temperance. You sit, he said. I'll post two at the door. Ezra. But Ezra had already turned to leave. I'm going to get the doctor, he said, with a little curl at the edge of his mouth that did not reach his eyes. The other one, the one that says who lives and who doesn't. He stepped into the yard and became a shape in rain, then a sound, then nothing. Father Dunn lit 3 candles and set them in a triangle on a plate. Wax ran and made little rivers. Albright washed Yonah's face and hands with a cloth and spoke to him in a voice that was almost a hum. Gray Elk stood with his palm flat on the wall, as if listening for something behind it. Temperance watched the boy's chest rise and fall, and put her hand where he could feel it if he woke. When it happened simply. The storm pulled at the roof and found a bad seam. Every lantern outside went cold. The chapel bell rope lifted on its own and then fell, and the bell above them gave one long, low note that made bone feel hollow. The candles guttered. The door swung a hand's width on its own hinge. Sheriff Kincaid turned his head toward the yard and saw nothing but rain. Then a shout came from the gate. Riders, someone called. There's riders, and they ain't ours. Albright looked at Temperance. Temperance looked at Gray Elk. Gray Elk looked at the boy. Father Dunn went to the door with his hand out like he could stop weather. Kincaid drew his pistol and hated the way his hand shook. The bell rope swung again, without a hand on it, and somewhere outside, something big huffed, a sound like a stove being punched open. Rain slashed sideways across the yard and made every plank shine. The riders came in a curve that made a trap. Ezra was at the point of it, hat low, slicker flapping, a shape made to look like law if a person squinted. His men spread to take the corners. They spoke low to their horses and cut the chapel off from the street like it was a corral. Sheriff Kincaid stepped into the doorway and set his feet. He did not raise his pistol. He did not holster it either. Father Dunn stood beside him, with both hands on the door, as if he could keep out water and men with the same touch. "You move along," Kincaid said. "This is a mission. You don't storm a church because you got a rumor stuck in your teeth." Ezra smiled like a cat with string. "We came to see the raider didn't slide out the back," he said. "Folks are nervous. Nerves lead to fires. You know how it is." "Get off this yard," Kincaid said. "You want to file a complaint. My office will be dry in the morning. You want to be dry now. Go home." Lightning stitched white across the sky and made every face into a little mask. In that light, Temperance saw they were not all hard men. Some just did not want to be the one who stayed at home while the others rode. That is how a town goes bad, not on purpose, but by joining. Inside, Yonah shivered in his fever and mumbled words Temperance did not know. Dr. Albright checked his skin and made a sound low in her throat. "It's going to break one way or another by dawn," she said. "The body decides." She poured a few granules of something bitter into water and lifted the boy's head and got the mix into him. "Slow. Swallow," she whispered. "Good." Gray Elk watched the door and the window in turns. He had the stillness of a hickory post. At times he touched the cot frame with the back of his hand, as if to remind the room that he was here, and that counted. The bell rope twitched once more. Father Dunn flinched, as if a cold hand had brushed his collar. He spoke without turning his head. "People have been talking about you," he said to Temperance. "They say a woman who stares down a bear is marked. They say the bell moved for her and no one else. They say things that make gnats of men's brains." Temperance did not answer. She took Yonah's hand, because that was a thing you could do with your body when your mouth could not make sense of men. The boy's fingers were very small and very warm. She let her breath match his, and let that be work. Ezra called from the yard. "Sheriff, we came here peaceful. I don't want to have to tell folks you fired on men who just wanted to see a face and read a bounty with their own eyes." "You'll tell folks whatever gets you what you came for," Kincaid said, still calm. "Rain's getting cold. Go home." Ezra's horse stepped side to side. He reached into his coat and pulled a paper. He held it up so the wind tried to snatch it. "Bounty's not a rumor," he said. "We all know the ink. We all know the seal." The men behind him made small sounds of agreement. One asked if the surgeon inside needed help, in a tone that made the word help mean a different thing. The rain ran off their hat brims like tears they would not claim. Kincaid breathed slow. He looked over his shoulder. "Father," he said, "you keep the boy in the back. Doctor, you do your work." He stepped into the yard with the pistol low and his palm up. It was not a challenge. It was the stance of a man who had been in more jails than saloons. "Nobody's dying on church steps," he said. "That's my line." Ezra's smile did not change. "Good," he said. "Then you won't mind if my cousin comes out where we can see the child's face. If it ain't the face on my paper, we'll go. If it is, the law will do what it is for." Father Dunn shook his head once, sharp. "No child gets paraded in rain to satisfy gossip," he said. The wind took his voice and set it down 3 feet from where he put it. He squared up as if to take more wind and more men. He looked small and braver than he would have chosen to be. Gray Elk looked at Temperance. "If they see him now," he said, "they will not sleep tonight. They will do things men do when they choose not to think. They won't get near him," Temperance said. "They won't touch him." "You think words stop men," he said. His tone did not mock. It made a truth. Albright packed the cloth into the bowl and set it aside. She had a way of standing that took up little space, and all of it at once. "Sheriff," she called, "we're not moving him. Not an inch. He's wet to the bone already." Ezra slid off his horse and handed the reins to his nearest man. "I'll fetch him," he said. That was when the first shot came. It did not come from Ezra. It came from the dark to the side where the yard ran out into scrub. It took a splinter off the chapel door. Wood jumped. Father Dunn jerked his hand back like the door had bit him. Kincaid pivoted, found only shadows and shoulders and steam. "Hold your fire," he yelled. "You want a death on church ground? That's what you want? You want to bring winter into your own house?" the men muttered. Ezra did not look surprised. A second shot cracked toward the bell tower. The bell answered with a long, bruised sound that went down the spine and sat there. A horse went sideways and threw a man into the mud, and then stood over him like a puzzled cow. Kincaid holstered and raised both hands, and kept walking into the yard until he stood between the chapel door and the men. Rain sheeted down his face. "Put your guns down," he said to no one and everyone. "You're going to claim you fired because a rope swung? You'll have to put that in writing and I'll add it to the file. I got a pen. I got a book." He thumped the breast of his coat where the little leather notebook lived. "You want your names in it? You want your children's children to read how their grandfathers fired on candles?" That quieted them in a way none of the other words had. Men have a strange respect for ledgers. Ezra looked bored. "You do love a paper," he said. "We can all write our names later. After." He made a small movement with his hand. It was almost nothing. Two men peeled off to the left like they had been tugged by wire. They headed for the chapel side door that led into the vestry. Temperance moved faster than she thought she could. She reached the vestry before they did and set her shoulder into it from inside so the latch would not slip. One of the men hit the outer panel with his shoulder. Wood shivered. His breath came through a crack. "Open up," he said, half laughing. "We got wet boots." "Go home," Temperance said. Her voice did not tremble. "You're tracked enough mud onto God's floor today." He chuckled. "God's floor sees worse," he said, and hit the door again. The hinge moaned. The bell above them gave one more long groan as the rope dragged from some breath no one could see. Kincaid's voice came loud and plain. "If you break that wood, I'll jail you," he said. "I swear it. I don't care if the river rises and drowns us both on the way there. You don't have a cell that can hold a river," the man at the door said. "Or us." "Try me," Kincaid said. Gray Elk laid a hand on Temperance's shoulder. "Step back," he said. "There is a way to make men turn their heads when a door won't." He gave a low whistle through his teeth that seemed to cut through rain. Somewhere near, another man answered with the same note, and then another further off. The sound made the hair stand on Temperance's arms. The two men at the vestry door paused like hounds who had drifted too close to a cat they did not see. They backed away without talking, boots squishing in mud. Ezra looked around his circle and saw their courage change shape. He looked up at the bell and down at Kincaid, and then past both of them to Temperance, through the open chapel door. He tipped his hat to her like they were in a parlor, and said, "You can't hold a boy against the world. The world comes in." He stepped back into rain and walked away without hurry. The others drifted with him in a rope that did not quite break. In a minute, the yard was only water and horse prints, and the little runnels that rain writes in dirt. Father Dunn shut the chapel door with his shoulder and slid the bolt. He leaned his forehead against the wood and breathed like he had just lifted an anvil. "This house is for the Lord," he said, possibly to himself, "not for boys named in papers." He turned and looked like he expected censure. He found none. He found only eyes waiting for him to tell them where to set the next candle. Kincaid shook water from his hat and came back into the back room. He looked smaller inside. He took out his notebook and thumbed it open, and then shut it again without writing. He looked at Albright. "That file," he said, "the one with the bear print on it. How do I see it?" "You don't," she said. "That's the point of sealing. But if I choose to tell you what I remember, no one can seal my head, unless Ezra means to start sawing." "Does the file have a name?" Temperance asked. "Does it have my husband's name in it?" Albright did not answer for a full 5 breaths. "It has a name, yes," she said at last. "And your husband's handwriting in the margin. That's where the bear print came from. He had ink on his thumb. It marks the corner permanent." Temperance felt the floor flex as if the chapel had shifted on its footings. "His handwriting," she said. "He signed a note about a horse injured in a fall and a wagon abandoned for cause," Albright said. The cause was Ezra's idea of a shortcut, and a debt he called due. A doctor drew a diagram of the break. A man from the ranch signed as paymaster. A canteen was listed as property. The seal went on because the army had a horse to account for and a man to be moved. That part is your business more than mine. But if I were you, I'd ask Mather at the trading post to show you the wagon inventory for that afternoon. If he won't, ask his daughter. She has a better head. Agnes, Father Dunn said softly, nodding. She writes the undertaker's book when her hands aren't in the wash water. He wiped rain off his sleeve, like it would kneel under his palm if he worked at it. Some girls know more than their fathers think. Gray Elk's eyes never left the boy. He is hot, he said. His spirit rides out and comes back. We can't stay where men come to make themselves bigger in each other's eyes. We take him where the ground is ours. Kincaid rubbed his jaw. If I let you, he said, the town will say I handed a wanted child to men they don't trust. If I keep him, men will come back with more men. Only one of those options ends without holes in a priest's walls. Then decide for the wall, Albright said, and let the talking do what it does. Talk has less blood than guns. Kincaid nodded, slow and tired. All right, he said. He looked directly at Temperance. You ride at dawn, he said. Not before. You take that boy where his uncle says he goes. I'll come after to ask the questions a badge is for. If the town wants to call me names because I did something to help a child, let them put that in my deposition. I'll keep the book. Temperance breathed out and did not know she had been holding breath like rope. She touched Yona's cheek. You hear me, she whispered. You're going to ride. Not far. Slow. We'll stop when you say. Yona's eyes opened in a thin line and closed again. Smoke, he murmured. Don't let the smoke in. We won't, she said. The wind ran out of itself toward dawn. The rain softened. The bell rope hung still. When the first gray light showed through the horn window, they moved. Gray Elk lifted Yona as if he were a bundle of dry grass and set him sideways on the horse, so his leg would not bounce. Temperance walked beside with a hand on the boy's belt. Dr. Albright rode near with her satchel. Father Dunn blessed the door, and then blessed the yard, and then blessed himself in a way that looked like apology. Sheriff Kincaid stood in the street and watched them leave, like a man holding a low wall against a flood. He turned and found two of Ezra's men sitting their horses at the corner. He tipped his head, and they tipped theirs, and no one spoke, because speaking would make them choose too early. The town slid away behind them, like mud off boots. They took the river path, where the cottonwoods made a roof that kept the light down. They passed the undertaker's shed, where Agnes Pike had set 3 boards out to dry. She stood in the doorway, with her arms folded into her apron, and watched them go by, with eyes that moved like pencils. Temperance peeled from the line and walked her mare under the awning. You want something written? Agnes asked, before a greeting. I want a page read, Temperance said. If a person came to see what the trading post wrote down about water, would a person with eyes in her head be able to see it? Agnes looked toward the big store, where Mather already counted money, with a rhythm that could run a church bell if you let it. A person like me sees a lot, she said. She wiped wet from a board. And a person like me knows not to tell my father what I see. He calls women's eyes a waste. So I waste them where they do good. Temperance nodded. She reached into her dress and pulled out the coin she had saved from a time when saving had a shape. She did not offer it. She showed it. Agnes looked at the coin, and then at Temperance, and then over at Gray Elk, and Yona, and Albright, and the way they were arranged in the road. You don't need to pay me, Agnes said. We all got to live in the same place after this page is read. She slipped off her apron and hung it on a peg. Give me 1 minute to get the key. She came back with a small brass thing and walked past her father without making a ripple. Inside the trading post, the air smelled like molasses and gun oil. Agnes set the key to the ledger case and lifted the lid. She ran her finger down a page with the same respect most men gave to scripture. Afternoon of the day before the storm, she said. 1 sale of 2 canteens, full. 1 sale of jerky and 2 twists of leaf. Signature for the canteens is Calder, but it is not the one who says he can write his name. She tapped the line. This hand is different. It slants like a man trying to hide he never learned letters right. Temperance stared. Who paid? She asked. Agnes turned to the previous page. There, she said. See that? A mark for paymaster. Ranch account. Someone with a stamp we don't keep in town. She turned another page. And later, on the undertaker's book, there is a charge for washing clothes. that came in without a body. That same day, 3 shirts, blood present, no corpse. I asked who it was for. I was told to keep my head on my own shoulders, so I wrote unknown. But I don't forget the way men hold their mouths when they lie. Temperance put her hand against the glass as if she had to steady herself. May I? She asked. And Agnes nodded. She traced lightly over the letters, as if the name could jump up through her skin. She felt nothing but paper, but inside her, a shape she had been keeping flat began to rise. Her husband's name was not on that line. It was near it, in a margin, in a note. She could see the hand. She knew it, the way you know a man steps on a porch when all the lamps are out. She took her finger away like the page had burned it. Agnes shut the lid without a sound. You want me to copy the lines? She asked. No, Temperance said. You keep them where they are safe. She glanced toward Mather. He counted and did not look up. The sheriff will ask, she said. You give him what you gave me. Agnes folded her hands in her apron. I will give him what the book holds, she said, and I will give him the number the bell rang last night, and he can put that down too. 13. She waited for a flicker of reaction. Temperance did not give her one. Agnes nodded, like that was the right kind of answer, and went back to her shed. They rode on. The river opened and closed beside them like a throat. In places the banks went low and yellow with willow. In places, the water had gnawed at a bend and left roots in air like ribs. They kept to the shallow side and made little noise. The boy faded and came back and faded again. In his waking he tugged at Albright's sleeve once and whispered. She bent to hear him. He said only a single word. Crows, he said, and smiled a little like a drunk. She looked up and watched 3 black birds cut across a patch of blue and keep going. They're watching, she said. Good. Let them report we. Mind our own, and do not shoot children. By midday, the storm had left the land a raw shine. The sun came out in patches and painted edges on everything that made eyes squint. Gray elk led them off the track to a stand of stone that rose from the valley, like part of a ruined wall. There were marks on it. Some were old, smoke writing from years when men stood there with a fire and told boys what came next. Some were fresh. A claw had found the stone and tested it. Half moons scored the surface at shoulder height. Here, Gray Elk said, we rest here. You will be seen by who needs to see you. Others will not. Temperance sat on a flat stone and felt the cold come up through her skirt and settle in her bones. She watched the mouth of a low path in the rock and saw shapes move in it and resolve into women. They were not dressed to frighten. They were dressed to do work. A girl barely 12 came first with a pot of boiled willow bark. An old woman followed with a packet of leaves wrapped in hide. A third woman, who could have been Gray Elk's sister by the set of her shoulders, took Yona's face in both hands and spoke, low and fast. He answered and tried to make a joke. She shushed him, but she smiled. Albright stepped back half a pace. She understood the line of respect without anyone drawing it. She opened her satchel with show and took out her bottle of carbolic and set it on a stone where anyone could see. I boil my needles, she said, and let that be a bridge. The old woman sniffed the bottle and nodded like it was an herb she understood. The girl put the willow brew in Yona's hands. Temperance steadied the cup. The boy swallowed and choked and swallowed again, and then leaned back and shut his eyes and eased into a sleep that looked deeper and more hopeful. Gray Elk crouched. He put a little ash on his thumb and made a light smear on Yona's brow. He sang 2 lines under his breath that rose and fell like a cradle rocked by a careful foot. Temperance watched his mouth shape the words and did not ask what they meant. She did not need to. She felt their use in her ribs. Kincaid rode in slow. He had looped a cloth over his badge. That small thing said something kind about how he hoped the afternoon would go. He dismounted and stood with his hands empty. His eyes told Albright he had more questions. Her eyes told him to wait. He waited. The day held steady as a man who stands with a full load. Then, close to dusk, a rider from town came hard and did not slow. He pulled up with foam on his horse's chest and talked too fast. Sheriff, he said, they're saying the boy's been took. They're saying the church is cursed. Mrs. Pike says the bell tolled 13. Ezra says you sold the territory for a woman's smile. He's pulled men together. They're riding again. Not to look this time. To take. Kincaid's jaw worked. How many? He asked. Enough, the rider said bleakly. He looked around, like he had not known people could gather anywhere but around a plank table with beer on it. He looked at Temperance. He looked away when he saw her looking back. I don't know if you know this, he said, but the town picked who writes the stories a long time ago. He's good at it. He gets folks to turn out. I come to tell you only so I can sleep later. Gray Elk straightened. We hear your words, he said. We will not be here when they arrive. Where will you be? Kincaid asked. In a place where a door is stone, Gray Elk said. Places like that are why men learn to pray. He nodded toward the ridge. The old woman and the girl and the sister were already on their feet. They had the straps in their hands and the bundle of Yona's bed ready to lift. They moved like a body, remembering the steps to a long song. They took the narrow path that ran behind the standing rock and cut down into a little draw where water had once run and now lay only in cups the size of a man's palm. At the end of the draw was a mouth. The mouth led into earth. The air there had a smell like iron and old rain. Gray Elk pointed to a ledge where the boy could be set and breathed on without smoke pooling. He went back to the mouth and arranged a curtain of brush with such care it did not look like a curtain. You could walk by and only think the wind had made a mess. Temperance and Albright knelt beside Yona. His sleep had settled deeper. His leg had lost its angry heat and gone to a dull warmth. The old woman placed a poultice where the skin was swollen and tied it firm. The girl poured water trickle by trickle past his teeth. He swallowed without waking. Temperance put her hand on his hair and did not move it. Albright sat back on her heels and rolled her shoulders as if she had been carrying a man twice her size for 3 miles. We hold here, she said, and then when they pass, we move again. Kincaid looked like a man who wanted to plant his office out in front of the cave and call it a fort. He settled for crouching in a spill of stones and checking his revolver. He wiped half a handful of grit out of the cylinder and smiled like a tired dog. You got me on a good day, he said under his breath. Tomorrow I might be a coward, but today I can do this. Temperance scooped up a little handful of sand and let it run out of her palm, the way a person lets go of a bad thought. She looked at Gray Elk. I stood between the boy and a bear, she said. I can stand between him and men. You already did, Gray Elk said. You will again. He squinted toward the ridge. We won't be standing long. The world's feet are coming. They came with smoke. Ezra had set brush alight on his way, the way a man tests how far he can push before the sheriff makes his hand hurt. Flames ran low over the dry scrub and set up a reek that coated the tongue. Men coughed and laughed and coughed again. Their horses rolled their eyes and danced away from the worst. Ezra rode as if the smoke were his doing, and therefore could not touch him. He had 2 men ride blind, to either side with bandanas over their faces and rifles in their hands. They drew a line across the mouth of the draw, without bending over to see that the draw had a mouth at all. Kincaid did not fire. He stood up. He put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled. That sound carried like a hawk's shadow. Hold, he called. You got business, make it with me. Rest of the folks here are under my word. If you kill me today, you'll have to find a new man to lie about. Ezra reined in. He was red-eyed from smoke, and he liked it, because it made him look like a man who had fought a fire, and not the man who lit it. You ready to write your name under a traitor's? He said. No, Kincaid said. I'm ready to write yours under the word arson, which is shorter. Big word, Ezra said. Man with hands like yours shouldn't use it. You'll hurt yourself. Albright stepped out and stood next to Kincaid. She lifted her chin a fraction. You set fire in wind, she said. That's not vengeance. That's a child with a match, and it burns folks you won't ever see. Ezra made his smile smaller. He looked past them, trying to pierce the brush with his gaze. He slid off his horse and took 2 steps down the slope, as if the ground belonged to him. Gray Elk said a word that was a warning and a promise at once. Ezra stopped. He spread his hands like a preacher who had chosen A mean gospel. Father Dunn was not there to swing the bell rope, but the bell moved anyway, far back at the chapel. In town, Agnes Pike looked up from her page and heard it toll 13 again and again, until her father said, "Shut that noise in the book," and she said, "I already did," and he could not answer what he did not understand. She dipped her pen and wrote a line she had never written before. She wrote living. Then she crossed it out and wrote vigil. Then she drew a small mark at the edge of the page, a mark that looked like a half moon, the size of a bear's nail. Back in the draw, Ezra took another step. Kincaid held up the notebook like a scrap shield. "You want to put your name in here," he said. "We can do that now. Say the words out so I can write them. Say, 'I came to this place to run smoke into children's lungs.' Say it." Ezra's mouth bent. He lowered his chin and laughed without sound. He took one more step. That was when the brush behind Kincaid trembled and then steadied. Temperance and Albright turned in the same breath. The little curtain had moved to a hand's width, off true. There was a red streak on the bark of the branch nearest the mouth. It was small. It was very bright. It was new. Temperance reached and touched it, and it smeared warm on her fingertip. She lifted her hand and looked. She did not say anything. She did not have to. Gray Elk saw it, and his face changed in a way that made his years stand up behind his eyes like men rising from chairs. He stepped past Kincaid and Albright and Temperance and set both hands on the brush and moved it aside with care, like a man drawing back a blanket from a sleeping child. The mouth of the little cave breathed cold. Inside, the ledge looked undisturbed for a beat too long. Then the darkness shifted. Yona's cot was empty. Temperance's heart swung wild. She thrust the brush aside with less care and took 2 steps in. Stone sweated. Her breath fogged. Her hand found the mark on the ledge where a heel had been a moment before. She turned and ran her palm over the rock and found a smear of blood the size of a fingernail, and then another the size of a thumb. She whispered his name, and the cave threw it back at her in pieces. Albright moved past her and pointed with 2 fingers. "There," she said. A strip of cloth hung at the height of a child's chest, caught on a spike of rock. It was torn from Yona's shirt. It was wet crimson. It dripped once and left a dot on the floor that looked like a tiny planet. Gray Elk closed his eyes once, hard. When he opened them, they were not softer or angrier. They were clearer. He turned to Kincaid. "You keep your men where they are," he said. His voice did not rise. "If they come near, I will count the number of steps they take and put that number into the ground with them." Kincaid put up both hands again. "No one moves," he said to the air and the men and the smoke and the bell that was still tolling somewhere a mile away. "Nobody breathes without asking." Ezra rocked on his heels like a boy denied a candy. "Looks like your friends lost their charge," he said. "Maybe the old ones wanted him after all. Maybe the bear finished what he started." That was when they all heard it. Not the bell, not the fire, not Ezra's voice. A low, deep huff from just beyond the bend in the draw. It came from something that had lungs the size of barrels. It carried the wet sound of an animal tasting air. The brush at the edge of the path shifted and then stood still, held in a hand that was not a hand. Temperance stepped toward the sound, because that is what her body did before her mind could name it. She kept one palm up and one low and open as if she were walking into a barn with a skittish mare. She spoke without meaning to. "Yona," she said, "if you can hear me, make a little sound. Make a crow click. Make a wolf step. Make anything that tells me you are where the breath is." The huff came again, closer. It pushed air into the draw and set ash spinning. Something heavy set a foot down, and then another. A large shape stirred the brush. A piece of horn slid into view at ankle height. It was not horn. It was claw. It came through slow, deliberate, the way a man's hand comes through a curtain when he is not sure if the room is his. Albright's fingers went to the Winchester. She did not raise it. She clicked the safety forward with the softest sound a piece of metal can make. Kincaid shifted his feet so that if he had to shoot, he would not shoot into the cave. Ezra smiled, like someone coming home and not liking the new curtains. Gray Elk did not move at all. At the mouth of the cave, The rope of brush that Father Dunn had hung once in some other season began to sway. There was no wind. The rope pulled itself once. It pulled again. It looked like something breathing. Further back at the mission, the bell rope moved in answer, and Agnes Pike put her pen down in the ledger and wiped her fingers where the ink had smeared and left 4 half-moons on her skin. She did not wash them off. She looked out into rain that had stopped and at a street that had emptied, and she whispered, "Name kept," to see how it sounded on her own tongue. In the draw, the brush parted the rest of the way. A brown shape filled the space and then leaned into the light. The Grizzly stood there, shoulder-cut and crusted, fur slicked to the skin, in places by rain. At its feet, close enough to feel the heat of its breath, was the boy. Yonah stood as if he belonged next to a hungry thing. His eyes were open. His face was very calm. He had one hand on the bear's wet flank. He looked at Temperance first, and then at Gray Elk, and then at Kincaid, and then at Ezra. He did not look afraid. He lifted his hand. There was blood on it, but it was not his. He said one word in a voice that was small and plain. No. Yonah's hand pressed flat to the bear's flank, like he had placed it on a warm door. The Grizzly's breath pulled and pushed the air in the draw. Steam lifted from its fur, in the places the rain had raised the oils. It blinked once, slow, as if sight cost it something. The wound on its shoulder had crusted and cracked, and beneath the crust, the muscle worked like a man's jaw under a bruise. Yonah's toes were bare. His shirt clung where the cave's wet had kissed it. When he said no, he did not say it like a command. He said it like a rule, already true before the mouth made it. Kincaid's pistol lowered in a way that looked like a tired arm, and not surrender. Albright's thumb eased the safety back with a small click that sounded louder than thunder used to. Gray Elk let 2 fingers drift up and settle again, the sign a handler gives a good horse when a cart rattles by. Ezra's jaw made a small sideways movement, as if there were a seed in his teeth he could not spit. He lifted his chin to show he was not shorter. Temperance felt something move in her chest. Not a break, not a mend, something else. She stepped 1 pace forward, then another, letting the grit speak under her boot so the bear would not be surprised by her. "Yonah," she said, keeping her voice very low. "How far did you walk?" His eyes flicked to Gray Elk and back. "To here," he said. "He came. I heard him in my sleep. I put my feet where his feet went." Gray Elk's mouth tipped. "You were born with that kind of listening," he said, but so softly the words fell short of the boy. Ezra laughed a little old laugh. "We have moved past sense," he said. "We could have been done before dinner, and now we are blessing animals and forgetting our papers." Kincaid's eyes slid to him. "You like papers when they put money in your hand," he said. "You don't like them when they put your name in a place your children can point to." Ezra showed his teeth. "Write it up then," he said. "Write this, Sheriff. The boy lured a beast to protect him. A trick, an omen, a raider's craft. The parish man will prove it with his bell." Father Dunn was not there to answer, but the bell back at St. Albans tolled once, as if it had heard its name in the rain. Agnes Pike looked up and put her finger on the place she had stopped and put a small cross next to the word vigil. Then, because no one stood over her shoulder, she added in a neat hand, "Rope moved of itself." She underlined itself and did not apologize even in her own head. Yonah took his hand from the bear's side, and the bear did not move. He pointed at Ezra with 2 fingers, not to accuse, but like a boy picking a man in a lineup of shadows. "He hurt him," Yonah said. "He shot his shoulder. He wanted the blood on the ground to bring other hungry things. He wanted us to be meat. He called the hunger like you call a dog." Ezra sneered. "You speak like a schoolhouse," he said. "Who wrote your words?" Albright's voice came across the draw, flat. "Who writes yours, Ezra?" she asked. "You've been practicing. Even your lies have a handwriting." The Grizzly turned its head and sniffed, tasting men. Temperance saw how slow the motion was, how heavy it must feel to carry that much body. She saw where the fur had been singed by her burning canvas. Shame moved under her ribs, and then stilled. She had saved a boy and lived. She would not apologize to a bear in front of men. She would apologize later, when a priest could not hear. Kincaid cleared his throat like a judge who had decided how long the speech would be. "Ezra," he said, "I need a word with you that you will not like." He opened his notebook and flipped to the cleanest page. He wet the pencil and lifted it. "Who paid Mather for the canteens?" Ezra lifted his shoulders. "I did," he said. "No," Kincaid said. "Who signed? The hand in Agnes Pike's copy is not yours. I have seen yours. It is neat like a man who wants to be counted respectable. That hand is crooked like a man who steals time to learn letters after the other men sleep." Ezra's lip curled at Agnes's name. "You trust a laundress," he said. "I trust a book held by a laundress more than a ledger you keep in your mouth," Kincaid said. His pencil hovered. "Say the name." Ezra looked down, then up, then sideways. He picked a target and missed it, and picked another. "Paymaster," he said. "Ranch account. It ain't my job to sign with my own hand when the ranch has a hand for that." He smiled. "Small. We all have men to do a thing so our hands stay clean." Albright let her breath out through her nose. "A truth wrapped around a lie," she said. "The Army keeps a horse file, Ezra. Your name is in it. You want me to read the margin? The part with the bear print smudge because a man you call kin took his thumb out of the ink pad too early and marked the paper." Temperance didn't move. She felt the sound of that smudge in her bones. Ezra felt it too and hated it. "You can't open that," he said. "Seal's a seal." "I don't need to open it to remember," Albright said. "And if we had to open it, I'd ask Gray Elk to put his heel on your chest while I undid the twine." Ezra flicked his gaze to Gray Elk and away. Gray Elk did not look back. Kincaid's pencil wrote 3 words that meant who, when, why, as a single bruise. He tapped the page. "You sold water," he said, "and then you told a woman to wait, and then you rode away and called it work, and then you tried to get paid twice. Once by a ranch account, once by a bounty. That's a law thing and a man thing both. The law I can write. The other I will let the town sing about until they are tired." "Write and sing," Ezra said. "And who's going to keep you from dropping that pencil and pulling that trigger when the bear takes your head off?" Kincaid didn't look at the bear. He looked at Temperance. "I'm not the one standing between anything," he said. "She is." Yona's voice floated from near the big shoulder. "He won't take her," he said, and put his palm back on fur. The bear huffed again, heavier, and then did a thing no one there would have asked it for. It turned. It turned its whole weight very slowly and walked away into the brush, shoulder dragging, head low, as if leaving a room where the talk had grown boring. It did not hurry. The draw made its shoulders look wider, and then smaller, and then the brush swung back into place, and the air came in again, as if it had been blocked for a long time, and only now remembered its path. For a heartbeat after, none of them spoke. Ezra filled the quiet with the only thing he had on hand. "Which?" he said softly toward Temperance, as if the word were a pebble he could throw into her cup and make the drink sour. "Bell witch." Father Dunn would have crossed himself at the sound of it. Gray Elk's mouth did not move. Albright's eyes got a fraction colder. Temperance turned toward Ezra and let him see her face, the way the bear had seen a burning canvas. "Say it louder," she said. "Say it in the street. Say it at the store. Say it where Agnes can hear with a pen in her hand." Ezra spat into the grit. "You're nothing," he said, but the heat had gone out of it. The riders came then, from the north, the way Gray Elk had said they would one day. Banners and beadwork, riding the rain. But the rain had gone, and the light ran along their horsehair necklaces and made each piece a small sun. They did not come like a charge. They came like a decision. 23, and each placed so that if one moved, the others moved without thinking. The first among them did not carry a rifle in his hands. He carried a rope with a bell-shaped knot at the end, and that knot sang between his knuckles with each hoofbeat. They drew in, making a crescent, not around Ezra, not around Kincaid, not even around Gray Elk, around Temperance. Yona stepped out from the brush and walked straight into that circle. He took one of the horse's reins and laid his cheek a second against the wet neck, and the horse breathed on his hair. He turned and stood beside Temperance, not behind her. Gray Elk stepped forward and touched his hand to the ground, and then to his own chest, and then to Temperance's sleeve. He did this slowly and with a weight that made even the men who did not care about weight feel it. Then he knelt. The 23 knelt with him as if connected by a single string, palms to earth, blades planted, heads bowed. Ezra made a small sound like a cough, swallowed wrong. "This is show," he said. "They do theater. They want you to believe a woman can stand against a tribe and get a thank you. It's quiet," Kincaid said, not loud. "You can smell a good thing and still say nothing." He took off his hat, because his head told him to, and because the hair under it felt hot. Gray Elk spoke simple. "The woman stood where men do not stand," he said. "She took the bite that was meant for my sister's son and gave it to herself." The bell rang because a debt was counted. He paused and looked at Kincaid. "We have words you do not know for this. If we use yours, they are these. We owe her our name. We keep a debt with what we have. We have horses and hands, and the old ones who still care which way a road turns." He touched the ground again and did not look up. Temperance stood there with rain-dried hair and dirt on her palms and the memory of fire on her cheek, and did not know where to put her hands. Her eyes stung, and she was not going to cry with men watching, but she might, and that would have to be its own truth. She raised one hand a little and lowered it. "I don't want your bending," she said, and her voice said the word the way someone says a word they have not used in a long time and are a little afraid might break. "Stand up, please." Gray Elk stood. He smiled with the left side of his mouth. "We bend once," he said. "Then we stand. Then we do the work this bend asks." Ezra clapped twice. "Slow. Work," he said. "Fine. Then work at this. Your boy is wanted." He lifted the bounty paper like a man raising scripture. "It says so here. Paper beats sand." Kincaid reached and took the paper and folded it and put it in his pocket. "Paper beats lies," he said, "and lies don't. Live long when you pin them to the page." He pulled out his notebook. He opened to the fresh page where his 3 bruise words waited. He looked at Albright. "Name," he said. She looked back at Ezra. "Ezra Calder," she said. "Paymaster present. Tom White. Signing for Calder Ranch. Water sold at Mather's under a false hand. Wagon left under a false cause. Injury to Army horse recorded. Bear wound by revolver at close range in Arroyo near St. Albans." She spoke as she wrote it in her mind, and the words put lines in Ezra's face he could not smooth with a joke. "Doctor present. Lydia Albright. Fort Ellis. Surgeon's seal with paw mark. You can add that to your paper if you like." Kincaid wrote the names. He wrote the words about the bear and the water and the wagon. He wrote the words about the bell. He did not want to, but he did it anyway because the town would talk and it might as well have a place to talk from. He wrote until his pencil left no mark, and then he bit the tip and wrote with the last lead. He signed his own name at the bottom, like a man nailing a board. "You satisfied?" Ezra said. Kincaid tucked the book away. "No," he said, "but I'm done with this part." Ezra's jaw flexed. "Then we're not," he said, and pulled his revolver faster than he had drawn all day, and shot toward the boy and the woman, because he believed the world owed him a straight line when he finally chose to walk it. He missed the boy. He grazed Temperance's sleeve and burned the cloth. He did not get a second shot. The Grizzly, which had not gone as far as it seemed, came back like a door. The wind had reopened. The shot had called it. Its shoulder screamed under fur, but its body did what bodies do when pain is a direction. It charged. Ezra turned to shoot a weight that was already on him. The bear hit him and took the air from the draw. Men yelled. Horses shouldered each other. The world went small and huge at once. Kincaid fired into the air and not into the bear, because a bullet in a rage is a lie. Gray Elk stepped between men and the beast and raised his palm and lowered it, because even a wild thing can see the difference between a line and a fence. Albright's hand went to Temperance's arm to pull her back and then let go, because Temperance had not moved forward. She had moved sideways, putting herself between Yona and death, and not thinking about what that meant in any language. Ezra got one shot off into fur, and it sank and made the bear make a sound like a stove door scraped. The bear staggered. It stood. It swung. It knocked Ezra to the ground and stood over him with its head low and its breath a wet hammer. Ezra looked up and saw teeth. and made a mistake with his face. He grinned the way men grin at other men when a card goes their way. "Do it," he told the bear. He wanted to look brave for the story. The bear lowered more. Its shoulder gave. It swayed. It did not bite. It looked to the boy. Yonah stepped out from Temperance's shadow and held his palm out. "No," he said again, to the beast this time, not the men. The bear lifted its head, a hand's height. In that hand's height of time, Kincaid moved. He put his hand on Ezra's wrist and took the gun with the clean, practiced twist of a man who had ended more arguments than he had made. Ezra did not fight him. His eyes were full of fur. The bear blew a wet breath into his face. Ezra gagged and would not gag in front of them. He turned his head and swallowed. The bear's knees trembled. It shifted weight to spare the shot shoulder, and the move made the choice. It stepped back. It looked at the boy like a teacher checks a slate. Then it turned and walked away a second time, slower. Each step a question answered. The draw let it go. The brush closed. The air came in as if someone had opened a window. There was a long nothing. Kincaid held the gun and smelled iron. Albright let her hand rest on Temperance's back and felt the heat through wet cloth. Gray Elk breathed in through his nose like a man who had been holding his breath under water and now found surface. Yonah leaned against Temperance's hip, not hard, just enough to tell the world where his balance was. Ezra pushed himself up with his palms and looked at his hands like they were strangers. He opened his mouth to say the thing a man says when he wants to make a new world start under his feet. "Don't," Temperance said. "Don't write another part with your mouth." He closed it. Kincaid took Ezra's belt with a small kindness. He could have made it cruel, and bound his hands by the buckle. "You're under arrest for arson, fraud, attempted murder, and the kind of lying that takes years to pay down," he said. "You will be afforded a deposition, and you will hate it, and it will stand longer than your temper." He looked at Gray Elk. "If your men want their own law, you tell them to let mine do this first. Then we can count what's left together." Gray Elk nodded. "We will count," he said. "We will count everything." They put Ezra on a horse that was not his. They took the long, low road back to town. The riders ghosted the flanks, not threatening, only present. They moved like men who knew where a line was and did not need to test it every 10 paces. The sun came down through a rip in the cloud and made the wet grass glow. At St. Albans, Father Dunn met them with his hand on the bell rope and did not pull it because the bell had learned to speak on its own. Agnes Pike stood in her doorway with her pen in her apron and her eyes full of ink. In the sheriff's office, Kincaid sat Ezra down and set a paper in front of him and handed him a dull pencil. He read the charges in a voice that did not enjoy its own sound. Ezra wrote his name, and the pencil point broke, and he had to wet it to make it mark again. Kincaid wrote his own. Albright added a line in a hand that looked like a wire. Well strung, bare wound present, non-fatal. Agnes, who had followed them in as if women always walked into places where men dried mud with their talk, leaned her hip against the wall and said, "You will want this," and passed Kincaid a page she had copied from Mather's ledger in a neat hand that would not embarrass a court. Kincaid read it, nodded, and pinned it with a tack to the board where he kept the town's tempers. They buried nothing that day. They did carry a man's pride down a step and leave it there. Father Dunn said a prayer, not for Ezra, not then, but for the animal that had been hungry and had done less harm than men. He said it in a corner where only Agnes could hear. Agnes wrote later in the undertaker's ledger, 3 bodies received, cause of death contested, bell tolled 13. Then, because she had stood in Kincaid's office and counted only 2 bleak forms, she drew a small bracket and added a quiet note beneath. 1 presence unreceived, seen only in marks. Temperance slept that night in a room behind the mission with Yonah's hand wrapped in the edge of her shawl. She woke twice to the bell rope stirring and lay still and let it move and did not fear it. In the morning, the riders gathered in the yard again, not to take anything, but to stand and see. Gray Elk walked up to Temperance and stopped as if there were a porous wall, a hand's breadth from her skin. He set down a leather thong with a small knot, the shape of a bell. "You kept a name last night," he said. "We keep what you kept." She picked up the thong. It was warm from his palm. She did not put it around her neck the way a hero in a print would. She looped it through her belt and let it hang against her hip, where tools live. The riders saw that choice, and their eyes softened because they understood that kind of keeping. Kincaid came with the deposition copy in his hand. His thumb had left a gray crescent where the pencil had smudged. He offered the paper to Temperance. "You want to read it?" he asked. She shook her head. "I know what it says," she said. "It says a man I should have been able to trust sold water that wasn't his, and tried to make my bones into a payment." Kincaid nodded. "It says that," he said, and then, after a breath, "and it says the army doctor signed to say a bear was a bear and a boy was a boy. I put that in there because sometimes, in a few years, men forget the names of things." Albright looked like she wanted to smile, and did not, because standing there someone's life had been saved, and someone else's had been broken, and smiling had to ask permission on days like that. Gray Elk made a small motion with his chin. The riders turned as one, each lifting his reins with his fingertips. They formed a loose ring around Temperance that was not a trap, not a parade. It was a circle the size of a little morning. They bent, all of them, at the waist, palms to earth, blades planted, heads tilted, so the sun ran along their cheekbones. It was not long. It took the span of one slow breath. Then they stood and were men again, busy, particular, hungry. Yona looked up at Temperance and smiled in a way that made him look like the boy he was, not the boy men had tried to make into a reason. "It's done," he said. "It's started," Gray Elk corrected, but even his correction was soft. The bell at St. Albans did not ring. It did not have to. Agnes sat at her desk and wrote one last line in the undertaker's book with a hand that did not shake. She wrote, "Name kept." Then she flipped the page and left a corner turned down so that if anyone came looking later, they could find it fast and lay their finger on the right place. They did not see Temperance Vale cross into any court after that, not for herself. She rode once to Fort Ellis and stood under the surgeon's window and did not call up. She turned her mare and went home. And home meant now, wherever Yona laughed, and Gray Elk knocked the sand from his boots, and Kincaid leaned in a doorway with his hat backwards, and Albright took off her gloves with her teeth. She walked a field in late light and found a place where a stand of chokecherry made shade enough for a woman to stand in and breathe. She pulled the leather thong from her belt and held the little bell knot in her palm, and if the wind moved it, she did not pretend it was only wind. This comes from a sheriff's deposition, where one name was scratched out, and from a coroner's inquest, clipped to a sealed surgeon's file, the inquest that lists a fourth presence at the chapel, unidentified, with hair the color of rain-dark cinnamon. If the record speaks again, you'll know which page to open first. If this hit you, tap like and subscribe so more people see stories that matter.